Hi there, my name is Chris Coursey. I'm the president of Thrive Today. And Thrive Today focuses on training 19 relational skills that make relationships work. And one of my favorite skills is skill 13, seeing some of what God sees, seeing others through the eyes of heaven. So it's using a lens of heaven to see one another. And I want to tell you about the time that I caught a glimpse of heaven by looking at my friend's face. See, I got a call one day out of the blue. Good friend of mine who lived in another state. Her health was failing her. She knew that her time was short. And she said, "Chris, it would mean a lot to me if you would come and pray with me before I die." Now, how could I turn that down? Here's someone I loved. Her days were short. Her health was failing her, and she wanted to see me and wanted some prayer. So Jen and I packed our bags, and we made this trip, just kind of got there as soon as we could to see my friend. And so I had a chance to spend some time with her, and I'll never forget knocking on her door and just hearing this very soft voice saying, "Come in." Man, it was my friend. And I was shocked to see her and the condition of her health when I walked into that room that day in her apartment. She was thin. She looked frail and tired. It broke my heart, honestly, because usually she was very bubbly and energetic and just so full of life and joy. But here it took all the energy she had to hold up her head, to talk, to speak, to interact with me. And she invited me to sit down near her. And so I walked over and I sat with her and we chatted for a few minutes. And she said, "Chris, it would mean a lot to me if you'd pray with me now." And I said, "I would be honored." Now I could tell she just didn't have a lot of energy, so I was a little bit concerned about her holding up during our visit, but she hung in there. She said, "Chris, would you just pray with me?" So, just prayed. I just prayed for my friend. And I could tell she was tired. And the fatigue levels were really high. And I could tell she was in a lot of pain. But I was praying for God's peace that day. And I was praying that she would be able to see some of what God sees. And hear what's on Emmanuel's mind for her. I'll never forget, as I started to pray, she then started to pray and she started to interact with the living God, and she started to talk with Jesus, and she started to hear from Jesus, and she sensed God's peace and God's presence. And I watched as this energy and this vitality and this strength was like supernaturally restored in her body. And I saw her face start to light up as she was interacting with Jesus. And much to my surprise, it was like Jesus gently pulled back the curtains just a little bit into seeing some of what he sees and some of what he wants her to see about heaven. And so just kind of carefully pulled back the curtains, and she started to describe these golden streets. She described these children laughing and playing on like this swing set, and she even described like these snowflakes falling, but they were gold, so they were like gold flakes. But she just described the peace and the joy, and there were actually a lot of things she couldn't describe. She didn't have the words. But I watched this frail, weak face in my friend suddenly come alive. Like it kind of reminded me of a lamp that's just been plugged in and the light came on. And I watched in amazement the delight. She started laughing and crying, and just this joy, this unspeakable joy and peace just flowed over her, in her, through her. And I just sat stunned. I watched this almost this blank canvas just come alive with colors and vitality as she described what she was seeing and what Jesus was saying and what she was sensing. I felt like I caught a glimpse of heaven that day. It was one of the most meaningful experiences that I've ever had. I've never seen someone go from being so weak and frail to suddenly just being so full of life they could hardly contain it. Now you see, I didn't know within less than 48 hours she would die, and she passed away. But I had an opportunity to share at her funeral just how glorious it was to sit with her that day. The whole reason for my visit was she wanted me to pray with her, but I felt like I was the one that received the blessing because I got to watch as she interacted with the Good Shepherd. She sat before the living God. He led her by the hand and showed her things that I no eye has seen, this side of heaven. It was just amazing to me. So I knew when I got news that she had passed, I knew that she was there delightfully dancing in heaven, singing, laughing with the living God. And so my prayer for you today is that you will also learn to live with this lens of seeing some of what God sees when he looks at you, when he looks at your family, your friends, when he looks at the world, that you will see some of what he sees, and that we'll learn to value some of what he values. You see, God looks deep at the man's heart. He doesn't just look at the skin or the exterior. Just as Samuel was looking for God's chosen one when he looked at all of David's brothers who were lined up. Just Samuel thought he knew just who that chosen one would be, and yet David wasn't there. And God taught Samuel a very important lesson that day, that what God looks at is much different than what man looks at. So I pray that you will practice and learn this important skill. We call it skill 13, seeing some of what God sees, whether we call it God sight, heart sight, or even what my friends call eyesight. And may you live with this new lens of seeing the world, seeing people with some of what God sees, and experience the joy and the delight that my friend experienced that day.